Hello again, everyone. This is a continuation of the series detailing Jason's strange paranormal experiences. If this is your first time watching something from this series, I suggest you watch the episode 1 to get to know the exact situation, link in the description below, before watching episode 2. This part will be the beginning of the next major encounter I had. When we last left off, we realized where the entity was attached, removed, and burned the item while dealing with escalating incidences. After the items were burned, all was normal and it would stay that way for quite a while. I still heard and felt a few odd things here and there, but nothing was particularly foreboding or dangerous. Fast forward to July 2008. I had graduated 6th form, did well on my exams despite my issues. By issues, I mean my illness. Like I've said before, it's incurable. I have flare-ups of pain, etc., and am one of these close up to my exams. I applied to my local medical school and was accepted with a government subsidy and university subsidy, where the government pays a part of my fees, as does the university, and I pay what's left. At the time of my acceptance, I was still 17 and the university says you have to be 18 to attend, so I was deferred to start the program in September 2009. I was perfectly fine with this, as this meant I had a whole year to do anything I wanted. I still lived with my grandparents and was told to just relax for the year, so that's what I did. Stayed up watching TV, played games in the day and played guitar and other instruments in the evening, watched TV, repeat. I did this same routine with outings here and there and life was mostly good. It's now December 2008. I was starting university the next year. My illness was worsening and my grandmother was unwell at the time. As a result of all this, my parents decide to sell their house and build an extra upper floor on my grandparents' house. That would allow them to be nearer to my unwell grandmother, who had a massive heart attack just the year before, allow them to cart me off to the hospital faster if need be. There are 2 hospitals in close proximity to the house. Plans had been drawn up and approved and construction was due to begin January 2009. Most of you familiar with the paranormal will by now realize where this story is headed. Christmas went well, aside from a few trips to the orthopedic surgeon and emergency room for me. I had gotten a brand new electric guitar and was playing it all day and night, improving my skill. At the end of January 2009, my grandparents and I moved into my parents' house to allow the construction on their house to proceed. Seeing as I had little to do, myself and my father would head to my grandparents' house to supervise the construction. Many of you may wonder how my father had that kind of time in his hands. He played sports when he was younger and one injury caused a chain reaction of problems, leading him to stop work the past year. The first week of construction went well and nothing was amiss. The next Monday, things started getting real. Some of the construction workers lived hours away, so to make things easier, we allowed them to bring some furniture, beds, etc., and stay at the house in the nights. This would enable them to start work early and also to be the guardians for the house at night. One Monday, I was speaking with one of the workers when he asked me a strange question. He asked if there was anyone aside from them and us that had keys to the house. With a hint of trepidation and fear, I asked, "Why exactly are you asking that?" He said, "At night, when all of us are asleep, I hear footsteps and talking in the darkness, and I'm not the only one that's heard this." Fear came back to immediately. This was the scenario I was dreading, and here it was, seemingly about to unfold before me all over again. Upon deeper question, the workers said they heard several voices and footsteps, almost as if a group of people were conversing as they walked about, although no one was able to make out what was being said. They all said it sounded like whispers. These were big, bulky, manly construction worker guys, and I could see real fear in most of their eyes. I decided that, since it was daytime, I would walk through the house and see if I felt or witnessed anything. The second I entered the house, I felt different. While it was not an oppressive atmosphere as before, there was that sort of butterflies in the stomach feeling. I also felt that I was most certainly not alone. As I walked, I could swear I heard footsteps other than mine. The floor was littered with dirt and Ekman dust and debris from knocking away walls, so walking produced an audible crunch with every step. I heard footsteps just slightly out of time with mine. I stopped suddenly, and for maybe a second or two, I heard footsteps continue and then stop. I didn't see anyone or anything though, which was strange because I am able to see entities. I came to the conclusion that the ability to see these things was dependent on my ability and the entity itself. The more developed my ability, the less an entity would need to manifest for me to see it. I figured that these entities had not manifested enough for me to see, but I could feel them. That's right, several of these things, whatever they were, and they were active in the bright sunshine. That was probably most frightening because, unlike before, it was obvious that light provided no solace from them. At the time, there was just a skeleton structure for the second floor, and although the staircase had been cast in cement, it was not fully cured and had no support structure yet. All that to say, it couldn't support any weight at all yet, much less a person. That becomes important in just a bit. I kept feeling these things whenever I was in the house, and although I had not come to harm, I could swear I heard voices, which now went along with the footsteps. This continued the rest of that week. The next Monday, the crew decided to start working later into the night in order to get things done on time. That was bad news for me because, whilst my dad was driving all over to get required materials, he depended on me to be there so that the crew wouldn't have time to slack off. One evening as the sun was setting, I was in the room next to the area with the stairs. I heard laughter and footsteps up and down the stairs which still couldn't support weight. I ran into the room and it all stopped, but I had the feeling I wasn't alone. I should mention that aside from lights used when the crew worked at night, all other lights were shut off to conserve electricity, so the room I ran into was pitch black. I mean, can't see your own hand in front of your face black. I pulled out my flashlight, set it to max output and looked around. Nobody. I walked outside and asked if there was anyone inside. No, we were all out here mixing cement and laying blocks for this wall. Shit. I'm not sure what I was thinking, but I went back into the house, albeit with my 170 lumen flashlight on full blast. As I walked, I heard footsteps and whispers. Again, I stopped, but this time the footsteps continued in front of me, then around the corner and out of earshot. I cautiously rounded the corner, half hoping not to hear or feel anything. I obviously had no luck because as soon as I entered the next room, I heard footsteps come toward me, go around me, and then stop just behind me. I froze in fear as I felt breath on the back of my neck, and whatever it was whispered a deep, raspy hello. Now, when I heard that, every instinct was telling me run for your damned life and don't look back. I, for whatever reason, decided not to. I turned around and there was nothing behind me. These things were screwing with me. I wasn't sure at the time if it was a friendly kind of thing or something more sinister, so I decided to keep on investigating. I looked all around the room and saw nothing, yet, from time to time I would hear a few footsteps and a chuckle. After maybe 30 minutes, not sure, I lost track of time when all this happened, I heard my father calling me, saying it was time to leave. I was relieved but curious and anxious at the same time, and that's a weird mix of emotions, let me tell you. I could swear that as I walked out of the room towards the front door, I heard footsteps going up the not yet completed, non-weight-bearing stairs. The next few days and nights went fairly similarly. Activity was low but present in the days and seemed to pick up at night, and I was not able to see any of these entities. That Thursday night, I went into the house, again trying to see if I could pinpoint the reason for this activity. At this point, the supporting structures were put up for the stairs, so it was usable, though there was not much upstairs to see yet, just some bare brick and unfinished walls and windows. I went up and saw the electrician high up on a ladder, wiring up some sockets for lighting. The ceiling is vaulted, so we plan to have a part of it made into a mini attic to store things when we shopped in bulk. He was new to the crew as the electrical work had just started at the time. He asked me who I was talking to and laughing with for the longest time. I was surprised and afraid. I told him that I had only just come upstairs. If there ever was a look that someone could have to indicate they shit their pants, that was the look he had when he heard what I said. Just for some context, this guy was maybe just shy of 6 feet and did bodybuilding as a hobby, big burly guy, not easily scared, that kind of thing. He climbed down from the ladder and looked me right in the eyes. His eyes were wide and he was seriously freaked out. After a bit of silence, he said, "Then who the hell was just below where my ladder was, whispering, laughing, and walking around the rooms?" This made 5 people, who all separately described the same occurrence. I said I had no idea what was going on and I was having no luck finding out. He left for the night right after that and never worked in the house after dark again. The next day, Friday, went fairly uneventfully. My dad decided to get the crew some beers and such because they were doing great work and everything was on schedule. By the time I had bought the beers and returned, it was maybe 7 or 7:30 p.m. As they all sat and drank, my father and I decided to go upstairs and have a look in what would soon be the second floor. We went from room to room, the study, TV room, family room, and then proceeded to check out the bedrooms. We went into what was to be my younger brother's room and looked through the space in the bricks that was to be a window and saw all of the crew below. Just then, I felt a temperature drop and I felt breath over my shoulder and it had the distinct smell of rum. Best I can describe it as like someone having enough to drink to where they don't know their own head from their ass and then try to talk to you. My father turned to me as I turned to him. He said, "Did that just?" And I replied, "Breathing and the strong smell of rum?" He nodded and we went back downstairs to see everyone still sitting around and chatting. Now my dad was also where something wasn't right. The next day, I tried going around to neighbors, asking if anyone had ever died on the property or if anything strange had happened. Most of these neighbors had lived in the area 20 to 30 years, so I took their word for it and wondered where to look next. Blank as to where to look and exhausted, I went back to the house. When night came, I decided to go back inside to see if I could elicit some activity, seeing as nothing bad had happened thus far. I heard footsteps at the other end of the house, at the back, where the kitchen/dining area was to be. As I rounded the corner, I almost recoiled in shock. At the far end of the room stood 2 figures, a man and a woman. They were semi-transparent and had an odd ethereal glow to them. They were dressed in clothing from a period long past, maybe the 1800s. The man had on trousers with suspenders, a plain button-down shirt, and a tattered vest. The woman was wearing a dress that looked sort of typical for the period, lacy and frilly, with a large flaring of the dress from the waist, almost to the ground, and you could see it had a lot of volume. I got the butterflies in my stomach and had just noticed that the area had gotten quite cold. I figured they needed all that energy to manifest to me, but why? As that question went through my head, in the blink of an eye, literally, they were face to face with me. The man's face was beaten, bruised, and it looked as if some of his facial bones were broken and his eyes were bloody. The woman also looked bruised and her dress was tattered. The most striking thing about both of them, though, was that their necks were at an unnatural angle. It freaked me the fuck out, so much so that I could barely breathe, much less move. They stared straight into my eyes and then they each put one hand on me. I began to feel intense fear, sadness, and loathing, but it was as if those emotions were not my own. It felt as though I was a witness who was feeling their emotions through them. I also felt intense pain all over my body. My face, belly, back, and neck all hurt more than I could even describe. It was the pain of death. I realized that these people were relaying their last feelings and emotions to and through me somehow. I also began having flashes of what I assumed were memories. The first ones were happy, the man and the woman, walking, talking, and laughing, exactly what I had heard so many times before. Then they got more grim. I saw the woman crying as the man drank from a bottle while slumped over in a chair. What I saw next was worse, the man being beaten by a group of other men. They punched him in the face and chest, and even as he fell to the floor, they kicked and stomped on him. The woman, meanwhile, was being stoned. A crowd of men and women hailed down rocks large enough to hurt, but not kill. When I thought it couldn't possibly get worse, it did. I saw the man and the woman, side by side, just as they stood before me. They were being strung up on makeshift gallows as they begged and cried, then snap. I felt an intense pain in my neck, and everything blacked out. I regained consciousness and was unsure of how much time had passed. I realized that everything that had been happening were a mirror of what happened to that man and woman from their happier times to their last moments. After that, I didn't hear any more whispering or footsteps, nor did anyone else. The renovations were completed and I currently reside in that same house. I never told anyone what I experienced that last night, lest I be locked away in the loony bin. I later learned that the whole of my neighborhood and the next was once a plantation back in the days of slavery. Maybe my grandparents' house was built on the site of the man and woman's former home and the renovations stirred them up. I don't really know, nor did I ever find out what the couple did to deserve that kind of death. I like to think that the interaction I had with them helped them to have their story known, if only partially, allowing them to finally rest. The man and woman had showed me happy and sad parts of their lives, as if they were using me as a conduit. I like to think that I helped them to find peace. After that incident, the house was finished and we began living in it in August 2009, just before I began medical school. This next bit may seem a bit out of place, but it has a part to play in this story. My mother and grandmother are both clean freaks. Everything has to be spotless in the house. Floors cleaned, furniture dusted, etc., etc. With both of them now under one roof, one housekeeper wasn't enough, so they brought in one more. One of them would do the upstairs cleaning, and the other would clean downstairs. One of these housekeepers had been working with us for a few years at that point, and the other was new. She was the daughter of one of my mom's previous housekeepers. Her mother had a bad heart and went into heart failure one weekend in early 2009 and entered the hospital but didn't leave alive. Back to the story. The rest of 2009 went fairly uneventfully. In December 2009, I finished my first semester of medical school and passed all my exams with good grades. I was happy, even though I had been having setbacks. More on that later. In January 2010, I was still on holiday and as before, ate, slept, watched TV and played video games all day. One night in mid-January, I was up watching TV pretty late. It was around 1 a.m. and I decided to get a snack, play games or watch TV till 2 a.m. then get my ass to bed. Why was I being so specific, you ask? Because I sure as hell wasn't going to be awake at 3 a.m. because that's when bad things happen. So as I walked to the kitchen from my TV room, I felt that familiar butterflies in the stomach feeling. I also felt that something was lurking nearby, but I couldn't see it. I flipped on all the lights in the kitchen and nothing. Well, nothing except that smell. It was like the scent of a cheap perfume. The smell was of roses, but it was sickly sweet and very strong. The strange thing about it was that unlike perfume, it was confined to a particular area. In this case, it was the dining room, kitchen, and a few of the steps leading upstairs. I'll freely admit that even though I've had frightening encounters with entities before, this was very different. I was filled with dread, which was made worse by the fact that I couldn't see the object I was dreading. The only reasons I knew that something was there were that smell and that butterflies feeling, which I've come to realize is like a sixth sense for the paranormal. I walked throughout the kitchen and dining area and saw nothing. I tried to ignore it, or at the very least, not show fear, because if you've been following my series, you know showing fear is very bad. I got my snack at a slightly hurried pace, mind you, and went back toward the TV room. I tried to act normal, but I was very paranoid and on the lookout for anything that could want a piece of me. Yet, I saw absolutely nothing. I had learned from my previous encounter that, just because you don't see something, that does not mean it isn't there. I suspected that this was going to be a buildup of events and I would come to find out I was right. The next night, I realized that the smell had intensified somewhat and spread out a little further. It was now past the entrance to the dining room and getting into the living room. The most frightening thing about that realization was that, along with the scent expanding, I began to see something in my peripheral vision. It was a black mass. It did not really have a discernible form at the time, but I could sense the atmosphere becoming heavy and I knew things were going to get worse. I was also sure that my family would not be able to feel its presence at its current level of manifestation. I waited maybe 2 days. All the while, the scent was expanding and the thing began to look less like a blob on the floor. It looked long or drawn out, as if being molded. At this point, I was able to see it whenever it manifested, rather than just in my peripheral vision. The night after it began to take shape, my parents, grandparents, and brother went to a function. I'm not sure what possessed me to refuse to go along, but I felt that if I was going to tell my parents about this, I needed specifics and details so they wouldn't think I was just BSing them. Asterisk, just to note, once you enter the dining area, there is an indentation in the wall that used to house the fridge, but once the place was remodeled, the fridge was moved and a small chest of drawers was put in its place. The chest of drawers was smaller than the indentation, so there was space on either side. When everyone had been gone for maybe 30 minutes, I began to walk from my room to the kitchen/dining area. I began to smell that all too familiar, sickly sweet scent of roses, and my body began to betray me as it froze in fear. I looked around, and in the corner, between the chest of drawers and the wall, I saw it. It looked like person, but it was made of that same inky, impossibly dark blackness that the entity in the earlier parts of my story was composed of. I looked at it, and instantly, my fear escalated. It was the eyes. Best I can describe them is that they were red, with yellow blotches almost like a fire raging in its eye sockets. Even though that was scary enough, it wasn't that I feared. It was the feeling I got from it. It was as if it radiated hate. I could feel that it wanted blood, it wanted to kill, and it harbored malice and hatred behind those fiery eyes. It wasn't as tall as the previous entity, but its limbs were long and gangly and ended in these dark, black, claw-like appendages. This thing was maybe 5 feet tall, and yet its claws, or whatever they were, almost touched the ground. Its back is hunched over, and its head and neck were at an unnatural angle, with those hate-filled eyes straining up to look at me. It roared a deep, rough, terrifying roar that smelled of sulfur and rot. I'm not ashamed to say that as soon as that happened, I ran. I ran to my room, got the Bible out, and prayed. I prayed that the long-armed, clawed monstrosity wouldn't get blood tonight, for me. I sat there in my room, Bible in hand, for I don't know how long. It could have been minutes or hours, but with my mind racing and heart beating furiously, I lost track of time. Eventually, I heard the familiar sound of my parents' vehicle, and I was relieved. As everyone walked into the house, everyone went about their business, except my dad. He said, "Is that your cologne? You put on way too much, it stinks." All I could say was, "That's not coming from me." He looked at me, perplexed and with some fear, and said, "Then who?" I proceeded to tell him everything, and when I was done, he was shocked, but the evidence was there. I did some digging and found that entities of a malevolent nature, especially demons, have the smell of sulfur and will sometimes try to cover it up with a sickly sweet smell. That was the point at which I knew I had a definite ability, and it was getting stronger. Before, the entity had to manifest itself for me to be aware, yet this time, I was aware of it days before it showed itself. I also realized my father had a similar gift, and his was also developing. That explained why he and I were the only ones to detect the smell. Little did I know that what was about to see and hear would be a whole lot worse than just the smell of cheap perfume. The figure with the long gangly arms and with eyes of fire had manifested, at which point I ran to my room and prayed for a long time. Eventually my parents arrived, and my dad was the only one to pick up the scent, the sickly sweet smell of roses. The next day spoke to the pastor of our church as well as the church member who had a similar gift to mine. They told us, just as I had read, that some demons and other malevolent entities have a strong scent of sulfur, so in an effort to hide it, they use a sweet smell instead. I described the entity to them, humanoid in shape, but made of inky blackness, skinny with gangly, long arms and legs that had black claws, almost like talons. I also described the eyes, which seemed to have an eternally burning flame behind them, which radiated hatred and malice. After that meeting, they suggest we get some religious artifacts, bring them back to get them blessed, and then place them around the house. So we went and got some crosses, got them blessed, and hung them over some doorways in the house and on some walls, especially in the dining/kitchen area. Even though it was evening, I could feel the thing, and I could tell it didn't like the crosses all over the place. I informed my dad, and he suggested we all pray and repeat Psalm 91 for protection. We did that, and I felt a little less afraid. In hushed tones, I reminded my family that fear only feeds this thing, thus they were to remain calm and go on with their activities as normal. Once night fell, naturally I was very vigilant and on edge, but I tried my best not to show it. Eventually, I needed to head into the kitchen area for food, so I did so, attempting to exude as much confidence as possible while attempting to remain oblivious, even though I knew it was there. I could feel its presence. It was a combination of the butterflies in the stomach and the heavy atmosphere. The best I can do to describe what the atmosphere was like is almost like trying to breathe in pudding rather than air, if you understand what I mean. Basically, the air was thick. On my way back to my room, I saw it standing there, eyes glued to me and following me. I tried to ignore it while at the same time saying Psalm 91 in my head. Later that night, I heard crashing and breaking happening in the kitchen area. By the time my dad and I got there, we saw broken plates and glasses. We were shitting our pants, I assure you, but we calmly cleaned them up as if they fell on their own. This thing was powerful enough to throw our stuff around. We needed help ASAP. The next day, we went to the pastor and explained everything to him, and he agreed to help us again. He put together a group of persons whose faith was very strong, including himself, my dad, me, because of my ability, not really for my faith, and a few other elders. By that night, the thing had gotten so powerful that the sickly sweet smell was perceptible to those in the group without gifts similar to mine. Prayer and Bible verse reciting began, as well as commanding the spirit to leave. Bad fucking move. As we entered the dining kitchen area, where it seemed to stay, it was visible to everyone there. It was commanded to leave several times and holy water was flung at it. It caused the thing pain, but also made it even more angry. In a fraction of a second, one of the church members who threw the holy water was attacked and was knocked to the ground while another grunted in pain and shoved back against a wall. We continued this while someone attended to the knocked out elder and the other church member. Eventually, it disappeared but was not gone as we could still detect the now obvious sickly sweet aroma. When the commotion was over, we all went to tend to the two church members who were attacked. The one that was knocked to the ground had hit his head, but thankfully, there was no serious injury caused by that. They were both hurt though. As they both regained their footing, we saw that they both had blood on their clothes. The one that was knocked down had 2 long scratches from the tip of his left shoulder to his belly button. Thankfully, it wasn't deep. The person that had been thrown against the wall had a large bruise on his back from the force of hitting the wall, I suppose. We got the 2 men patched up at the hospital with some BS excuse as to how they got injured, then got them home. The rest of us went to a park a little way off from my house to discuss the incident. The elder with the same gift as me said he had gained some important information during the interaction we had with it. He said that in his mind, he could see someone working black magic on the newer housekeeper. He said that black magic was used to summon this entity to follow, attach itself to her and her home in order to wreak havoc on us all. Upon realizing this, the pastor realized why our tactics earlier had not worked. The thing was attached to the housekeeper, so the only way to give it would be to break the bond tethering it to her. With this in mind, the next day we told the housekeeper what we learned. She said she was also being tormented and had similar encounters with the same entity. When we explained that it was linked to her, she agreed to allow for the pastor and a few others to undo the black magic and break the tether. That evening, the pastor, my father, the elder with the gift, the housekeeper, and a few others went to our church and proceeded to break this tether. I was not present, but from what I heard from my father, some crazy things went down. Objects levitated, the room they used went from room temperature to freezing and back repeatedly, among other things. Eventually the bond was broken and they recited a prayer of protection over the housekeeper. The sickly sweet smell and the oppressive atmosphere were gone and the house was back to normal once again.